Hey, what's up, and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars, where I am joined once again by the amazing Anthony A Perez, as he has agreed to come over to my channel and discuss a classic film that I have not seen in many, many years. It's Sister Act. Sister Act is about a Vegas lounge singer who, after witnessing a horrific murder, is sent into hiding in a local convent to await to give expert testimony. She's sent there because a mob boss would never think to look in a convent, but when she is tasked with becoming the new conductor of the nuns' choir, and it becomes popular, she may not be able to stay in hiding for long. First of all, thank you to Anthony for joining me in this review. I definitely appreciate it, man. Sister Act is a classic, and Whoopi Goldberg is a legend, especially in the early 90s. I mean, you got this role, which is arguably one of her best. You have the hilarious side character in Ghost, and even her role in Star Trek was fantastic. And as Anthony will tell you in just a hot second, it's kind of a bummer that we don't see more of her during this time period, or even nowadays, because she makes this film work. Her fish out of water situation is hilarious, as is her sarcastic wit, which constantly gives Mother Superior a heart attack. It's hilarious. Plus, the plot itself is incredibly simple. After a few years, you just come to think of this movie as the one Whoopi Goldberg movie with the singing nuns. And that's a fair oversimplification, because at the end of the day, you don't really care all that much that it's essentially a witness protection story. You really only care about Whoopi dressed as a nun, getting into hilarious situations, and singing a few catchy tunes. That's it. And for what it's going for, it's incredibly effective. And funny. But it's also a movie that you can't really sit here and deconstruct and talk about how masterful it is, because it's not that kind of movie. Unfortunately, it's so simple that there's almost not so much to talk about, other than to suggest to you whether to watch it or not. And in general, I say you should watch it. But before we get into some negatives, let's hear a word of what Anthony thought. Anthony?
What's going on, Dave, and all his viewers? Thank you so much, my friend, for having me here in another video. And this time around, you wanted me to talk about Sister Act. Yeah, this is a movie I hadn't seen in a long time, but similar to a lot of movies that I've talked about on both my channel and on other people's channels, this is just one of those movies that was always on for a huge period of my life. I just remember it being on TV all the time. I remember it just being on in people's houses. I remember people just throwing the DVD on, or the VHS when this movie came out. It's just really crazy to think back to when this movie was huge and popular and everywhere. And now it's a movie that you just don't really hear about too many times unless you're a big cinephile or just a big movie fan in general. And yeah, going back and revisiting this movie, it's 100% a classic and totally deserves that title. Whoopi Goldberg is phenomenal in this film, and I'm going to assume that Dave's already kind of given you guys the rundown on everything about what this movie's all about and all that jazz, so I won't bore you by repeating all of that. But yeah, Whoopi Goldberg is just so good in this movie. I actually just rewatched the movie Rat Race with her, and it just made me wish that we had more Whoopi Goldberg performances. There's just so many great movies of her, specifically in the 90s and early 2000s, that just were so fun and so funny, and Sister Act is definitely one of those. She gives a really solid performance in this film. It's believable. It's very Whoopi Goldberg-esque compared to like the other performances she would give later on in her career. But yeah, this movie is inspiring. It's fun to watch. It's funny. It's lighthearted, and it gets serious when it has to get serious. And one little funny note that doesn't really have to do with the movie itself, but just something I wanted to talk about, was I find it funny that this movie is on Disney Plus, and that I actually just revisited the Pirates of the Caribbean films as well. And in the third film and in the fifth film, we see some pretty graphic violence in those movies. In the third Pirates of the Caribbean, we see a gunshot to a woman's head in Singapore at the very beginning. That's pretty brutal. Her eyes roll back and everything. And then in the fifth film, when Jack Sparrow's about to get his head chopped off, he's looking at a basket of 2 decapitated heads. And I just find it funny that Pirates of the Caribbean, that has these adult themes, even though those films are PG-13, or this one, Sister Act, that's PG, that deals with adult themes as well, that these movies are on Disney Plus and it's okay. But then if you go watch something like Lady and the Tramp or Dumbo, there's that, warning about, racial stereotypes. I commend them for making a note of those things, but I just think it's hilarious that they act like those films are bad for kids or something that kids need to be careful of because of the stereotypes that are in them. Meanwhile, on Disney Plus, you have things like this, or you have things like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that have some pretty graphic violence at times. So I think it's just a funny thing about Disney Plus that you can kind of have this range of different, family or, sometimes older content that, it's just funny the way that they treat it, especially with putting a disclaimer on something like The Lady and the Tramp. But yeah, as far as this movie goes, I think it's great. I appreciate you, Dave, for having me on here and having me revisit a classic, a movie I haven't seen in quite some time. Whoopi Goldberg is great in the film, and I actually just wrote a quick set of notes here of specific people that I want to talk about from this movie really quickly before I wrap up my thoughts. Specifically, Maggie Smith, who plays the head nun at this church that Whoopi Goldberg's character ends up going to. Oh yeah, Maggie Smith is just so great, and she has so many great moments of just snarky dialogue. She's just such a believable actress, and I thoroughly enjoy her in this film. Beyond her, you have Kathy Najimy and Wendy McKenna, and the two of them are great. They bring something different and funny to the performances and just to the overall lineup of characters, and I just really thoroughly enjoy them. So without a doubt, those four actresses that I've mentioned in this video, Whoopi Goldberg, Maggie Smith, Kathy Najimy, and Wendy McKenna, yeah, I think that the four of them really bring something different and cool throughout the entirety of the movie that makes the film very charming, and I just thoroughly enjoy this movie. I find it to be a great time. The music is definitely enjoyable as well, and again, it just makes me wish that we had more Whoopi Goldberg performances to check out. It would be really cool to see her in more movies today now that she's an older woman, because I feel like she can bring something definitely different to her performances, but who knows if people even want to see that. I know I do, especially after revisiting Sister Act. So yeah, it instantly made me want to throw on the second movie, and I appreciate Dave for having me here on this video. If you guys have never seen Sister Act, check it out. It's a classic film from the 90s that just very much screams 90s, and it's also a kind of movie that you just don't see being made these kind of days, and I highly recommend it on that point alone. So yeah, I'm going to wrap up my thoughts really quickly. Sorry for being a little bit all over the place. It's early in the morning, and I just turned on the camera and decided to start talking about Sister Act. But again, a big thanks to Dave for having me here in this video. For anybody who's interested in checking out my content, you can go over to Anthony A Perez on YouTube, and you can find a bunch of movie reviews and a bunch of other videos where I make a fool of myself. So again, thank you so much to Dave for having me here in this video, and yeah, pass it back to you, my friend.
Thank you so much to Anthony for joining me in this review today. Once again, boys and girls, I've left a link to his channel in my description box below for y'all to check out. Send him some love. Tell him that I sent you. He's the reason I've ever done any of these collaborations in the first place, so I owe a lot to him. So please check him out. And like Anthony mentioned, this movie is a classic, and it's really great to see Whoopi do her thing. I think it's funny that you mentioned some of those disclaimers that Disney would put out, and then you'll have these more adult-centered films that don't have disclaimers. I haven't really noticed that a lot myself, but that sounds pretty hilarious and accurate. Sister Act isn't extremely adult-themed, but there certainly is language, there's smoking, and there's a murder, so it's not exactly Toy Story, you dig? Overall, you and I agree on this film, I think. It's nothing crazy, and like I said, it's so simple that there isn't much to discuss other than what we've already done. Negatives, I would just say the plot is mostly empty or shallow, as it's a comedy. So the actual plot of the film regarding the killer searching for her hits a standstill for a majority of the film. It's at the beginning, it's at the very end, but I'd say like 80% of the film is just non-hilarity, and that's it, which means a lot of the actual plot wasn't moving, and that's not always a good thing. If you made the movie stick to only plot, it would be something like 20 minutes long, I feel like, which isn't great, but I guess that's not exactly what you're watching it for anyway, are you? Let's go ahead and talk about my final score. My unbiased score is pretty decent because basically what you remember about this film are all technical things, like casting, like dialogue, music and sound choices, and even pacing of the comedy. It's more well done than it really needed to be. It may not be perfect, but there's something to be said here as to the validity of it being called classic. This score is 82%. My bias score, just how I personally felt about it overall, is a little bit lower because I absolutely enjoyed it, but the fact that I hadn't seen it in however many years should at least give you an idea here. It's not a must-see. It's a fun watch, and I don't think you'll regret watching it if you do see it, but I don't think it's must-see material. Still fun though, so this score is 74%, and when we combine the two scores together, we come to the final rating of 78%. 78 out of 100 possible stars, or a B letter grade for Sister Act. What do you guys think about Sister Act though? Is it a classic for a reason? Is it one of your favorites, or do you not like it? Let me know in the comments down below, and as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit that like, subscribe button, and bell to be notified when I come up with my next review. And until then, I don't know, hey, peace out!
Dave examines movies we just watch for fun. Davey is the expert.